Good morning, everybody. I'm Adele Krach, and I'm from Food Focus. And it's a pleasure for us today to host this webinar on a very hot topic that's within the media at the moment. And I'm sure that a lot of people have got some questions and not always sure where to turn these questions to. What's next for the meat analog products? As you know, in the media, we saw that the DALRAD, the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, brought out an announcement to say that they are going to seize some of the products, remove some of the products from the shelves. And then we had the Consumer Goods Council that managed to get it overturned through a ruling from the Johannesburg High Court. And there's now an interdict, and the interdict is until November. But what does all this mean, and what is actually happening in the meantime? So to assist us and to try to get some answers for you on this, we've got two speakers today. We've got Janusz Luterek from Hahn, and we've got Donovan Will from ProVeg South Africa. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your valuable time. Thank you for signing in today. And I am quickly just going to go through introducing Janusz and Donovan to you, and then Janusz will do a presentation, and then Donovan will also have his presentation. And in that time, please, if you can put your questions in the questions bar, we will make sure to try to answer all these questions. If we manage not to answer everything, we will make sure that we write an article to ensure that you can have all the answers. So, like I said, for Janusz, sorry, there we go, one slide back. For Janusz, Janusz holds a degree in both chemical engineering from the University of Pretoria and law from UNISA, and is a registered attorney, patent attorney, and a professional engineer. In 1997, Janusz became a partner at Hahn Attorneys, a boutique law firm founded in 1951, and is specializing in IP law, food law, regulatory affairs, and product liability and consumers law. Janusz is a custodian of SAFOST, and he sits on the Council of FSI, and he's also with the Consumer Goods Council and with the Food Lawyer Advisory Group and the Department of Health. So that is Janusz. As you can see, Janusz will be definitely be able to provide a lot of input in terms of all the legal related implications. And then from the industry and from ProVeg, we've got Donovan. Now, Donovan was the brand manager at Fry's, and he's now the director at the South African Vegan Society as part of the Vegalicious Cape Town team. He has a passion for connecting with key stakeholders and demonstrating how healthy, delicious, and ethical food choices can also lead to greater food security. And the part that I do like here is that Donovan says that the main reason why he joined ProVeg is so that he can enjoy to get to eat more fry nuggets and beyond meat burgers. So as you can see, we've got two gentlemen today that will really be able to assist you. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Janusz, and Janusz will present his talk to us. So thank you, Janusz. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be presenting this morning on the legal landscape and how we got to where we are now, and actually what are the other legal issues around this topic. For the last while, we've been really focused on this silly letter sent out by FSA claiming they were going to seize product, but in fact, the picture is much bigger than that. Just so that, sometimes when you present the facts, people think you're against the topic or something. And my own daughter's vegan, so I'm not against veganism. I'm simply going to point out what the legal position is. So, why is it not advancing? There we go. So let's talk about the outline of our legal regulation of foodstuffs. First of all, the food public health issues are all governed by the Department of Health. And there we're talking about things such as permissible ingredients, allergens, and labeling. And it's important to note that there's a labeling component under the Department of Health. In fact, most likely the major labeling regulations in South Africa. And that falls under the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act, the FCD Act, and then the regulations. And that's Section 2 thereof in Regulation 146. Most of you know R146. Then we have the Agricultural Product Standards Act. That's the one that all the excitement came about. And the regulations there, which are R1283, and as of a week ago, R2410, the one being the processed meat regulations, the one being the raw processed meat regulations, very importantly, Section 6 of the Act as well. And then we've got the whole issue of genetically modified organisms, GMOs, which actually falls under the Consumer Protection Act mostly, which is Section 24.6 and Regulation 7. So the general deception of consumers falls in our law actually under the Consumer Protection Act. Because I've heard a lot of discussion relating to these products saying consumers are being deceived, consumers are being confused. And whereas the APS Act and the Department of Health FCD Act play a role, the main law preventing deception of consumers in South Africa is the Consumer Protection Act. And that is in fact sections 29 and 41 of the CPA, which says it's illegal to mislead or deceive a consumer as to the properties, characteristics, and quality ingredients in a foodstuff, etc. And then we have the Advertising Regulatory Board, where marketing issues go to, and again, unsubstantiated claims can be, complaints against them can be lodged at the Advertising Regulatory Board. And where it relates to advertising, then it's not only the unregulated ones, but I was recently told by the ARB that even if there's a regulation, they will not refer it back to the regulator. They will actually deal with the complaint against an advert. So as you can just see from the last few slides, there's no single regulatory authority. There's huge fragmentation. The FCD Act enforcement gets done at municipal level by environmental health practitioners. The APS Act is enforced by the inspectorate and by the assignees. We are talking today about the FSA, as the assignee, which deals with processed meats and raw processed meats. The DTI has a role when it comes to CPA, and that's the National Consumer Commission and the National Consumer Tribunal. And then there are aspects of self-regulation, which is the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud. Do not confuse that with the Consumer Goods Council. And then we have the ARB, which is Advertising Regulatory Board. So one packet of product can fall under some of these or all of these, whereas all the focus up to now has been on this silly letter from FSA and the processed meat regulations. So the current issue is big change in enforcement. You know, for many years in South Africa, there was hardly any enforcement. And the reality is that a lot of people complained, why is there no enforcement? As soon as enforcement starts, people say, why are you enforcing it against us? You know, it's this NIMBY, not in my backyard, rather enforce against somebody else. So when we look at the meat analog situation, the composition of such products and the labeling would potentially fall under the APS Act, and more so when they eventually have meat analog regulations. But for now, the Food Safety Agency, the crowd that issued the seizure notice, they have the power to issue directives and, of course, to conduct seizures. But there was an interdict put in place, but I'm going to speak to that shortly. What does that interdict actually prevent the FSA from doing? And then we have the liability of the person in charge of premises. And this is also very important. If a prosecution was to take place, they would actually prosecute an individual, not a company. They will prosecute the person that is selling the product which is contravening the law. A company doesn't sell a product. A person decides to sell a product. So we then come finally to the Consumer Protection Act impact on meat analogues, and there we have the various provisions that deal with which could potentially impact a product like meat analogues. On the right are probably the most important ones, which are product labeling and trade descriptions, which prescribe GMO labeling. So only if you have less than 1% GMO can you call a product GMO free. And I mention this because there are many soy-based meat analog products. And 95% of all the soy in the world is GMO. Then there are the issues about meat products labeling. And if you have a meat product, you have to label it to express the origin and the process whereby the product was made. And to what extent does that apply to meat analogues? So Section 25 of the Consumer Protection Act puts the onus squarely on a retailer, because it says that a retailer cannot offer to supply, display, or supply any goods if they know or reasonably could determine, or more importantly, even have a reason to suspect that a trade description is likely to mislead a consumer. And you may have noticed retailers were very quick to start pulling the products when this whole debate started. And that is because they are, in fact, first in the firing. So what does Section 6 of the APS Act say? So Section 6 of the APS Act is the prohibition of false or misleading descriptions for products. Now, before I start reading Section 6 for you, it's really important to understand the structure of law. In our law, you have the Constitution, then you have the acts, the actual laws, and under a law, you will have regulations. An act takes precedence over any regulation. So the umbrella legal requirements for any product which falls under the Agricultural Product Standards Act, be it dairy, juice, eggs, processed meats, any of these products, is Section 6. And Section 6 says, no person can use any name, word, or expression or indication in any manner which by itself or in conjunction with any other verbal, written, printed, illustrated, or visual material conveys or creates or is likely to convey or create a false or misleading impression as to the nature, substance, quality, or other properties, or the class or grade, origin, identity, or place of production of a product. Now, I've read this whole thing because it's really important to get this, that it's not that someone who is a vegan that's looking for a meat analog isn't confused, because they will not be confused. The problem is when someone walks into a busy supermarket, or like happened to me the other day, I'm at the airport, I'm coming out of arrivals at Cape Town International, there's a number of coffee shops and eateries on the right. I look up and there's an ad for a chicken mayo sandwich. I look at the sign and to my surprise, it's got a big green V next to it. Now I'm alive to this whole issue. And I look at this and I say, how is a chicken mayo sandwich vegan? And then I have to read the fine print, only to read that it's tenders of something or other. So the problem you've got is that people will be contravening Section 6 because it says that you cannot create a false or misleading impression as to the nature, substance, or quality or other properties of the product being sold. And that misleading impression is to the general public, not to the narrow niche market that is out there. So we now know where Section 6 fits in. Then they brought out the processed meat regulations and the raw processed meat regulations. And there it clearly says, these regulations shall not apply to the following foodstuffs. And effectively it says it doesn't apply to meat analogues. But that does not mean that it doesn't apply to the Agricultural Product Standards Act. It just means that the general provision under the Agricultural Product Standards Act that I've just read to you still applies, but the specific issues of compositional standards and naming, which are in these two regulations, don't apply. But you can still apply Section 6. Then we have the FCD Act, R146. Now, I've heard a discussion about this, and I must say, to some extent, I'm in agreement that if these meat analog products are in fact simply processed foods, they are not in fact a meat analog. We must stop calling them that. They're just a processed food. It's vegetables processed into a patty. Then in fact, they don't fall under the APS Act and those regulations. They fall under R146. That being the case, they will require a name in terms of Regulation 9 of R146, and that name must be a proper description of the foodstuff. And if there is a codex description, then in fact you should be using the codex name for that product. Now, in the case where R146 applies, FSA does not in fact enforce that. That is then enforced by the EHPs under the Department of Health, and the interdict does not apply to them. The interdict was against the FSA. We then have the Advertising Regulatory Board. I won't go into this, but I, as a consumer who saw this chicken mayo sandwich, I could have lodged a complaint with the ARB and said this was a misleading ad. It says chicken mayo. I'm not an expert in this. I don't know why there's a green V next to it. When I bought it, it was not chicken. And then the Advertising Regulatory Board would have dealt with my complaint. So in terms of enforcement, when we look at DALRAD, we have the assignees and we have the inspectorate themselves. And the assignee in the case that we are dealing with today is the FSA. And in terms of the authorization by the minister, the FSA can do anything that the inspectorate can do. So in other words, they can issue directives, they can prosecute, they can conduct seizures. But there is an interdict. And the interdict of 19 August 2022 says that the FSA can't implement its decision of 16 August 2022 in order to conduct product seizures until 19 November 2022. But the applicant for the interdict is the CGCSA. So this interdict is not of general application, and I'll show you on the next page. The specific wording of the interdict says it only applies to members of the CGCSA. Therefore, the FSA could go to any company that is not a member of the CGCSA and carry on with its seizures. The interdict states that the applicant, which is CGCSA, must institute an appeal under Section 10 of the APS Act. But the CGCSA can never institute an appeal under the APS Act because no finding was ever made against the CGCSA. It was made against companies that sell products. So therefore, the assignee can carry out all the other actions which apply under the APS Act against CGCA members and any action against non-members. And if you don't believe me, there's the wording on the interdict. And if you look at 2.2, it says the first or second respondent are interdicted from seizing any meat analog product presented for sale in the Republic of South Africa from any and all of the applicant's members. Not of anybody. This interdict is limited to CGCSA members. Bear that in mind. I'm not sure FSA have read this interdict. I don't know if the FSA are aware that they could act against non-members, but it's very clear from the wording that they could act against non-members without any restraint, but against members of the CGCSA. The only restraint is they can't conduct seizures. They can still conduct an inspection. They can inspect for compliance with the APS regulations. They can take samples. They can order you to pay for your inspections. They can then issue a directive to comply. The Act doesn't say they can't issue a directive to comply. They can conduct an inspection, come and say to you, your product doesn't apply, we're giving you 30 days to comply. And if you don't comply, they can't do the seizure if you're a CGCSA member, but they can do the next step, which is prosecution, and they can then impose a fine. So the slate is not clean as we are sitting here. There are, in fact, many options for the FSA, least of which is that the interdict dealt with Regulation R1283 and not Regulation R2410, which was published afterwards. Even where there is no interdict in place, the FSA cannot simply walk into a business and conduct a seizure. They need a warrant issued by a court in order to seize any product. And quite frankly, if they have a warrant and you try to resist them, they can in fact have you arrested and they can exercise force to gain entry to your premises. So for seizure of products, they need a warrant, but what they could do even now, even though there's an interdict in place, they could seize documentation. They could seize anything that's involved in manufacturing a product which is non-compliant. The interdict says they're not allowed to seize any product. The only time that they do not need a warrant is if there is a risk that you will destroy the evidence. Then we have the issue of appeals. If a directive gets issued against you, you have the right to appeal. I strongly urge you to appeal. One has to lodge the appeal within 10 days in the prescribed period and pay the prescribed appeal fee. There is no possibility to extend this period. It is fixed. So the other option is to try and apply for a dispensation. Maybe they will be very negative towards that because of the whole litigation, but they do have to consider it. Under the APS Act, you can get a dispensation. No dispensation is possible for contravention of the FCD Act, the CPA, anything under the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards. You cannot get dispensations for non-compliance. Now, this one is very important. So if the FSA come and seize product or interfere with your business, to the extent that they are acting in good faith, there's no liability. But if they enter your premises and try to interrupt your business or seize product, but they don't have a warrant, then they fall outside this indemnity. And in fact, the FSA and the inspector themselves would be liable towards you for any losses that you suffer. Penalty-wise, if you're contravening the FCD Act, you can see that the fines can be up to 50,000 Rand for a first offense, 100 for a second, 200 for a third. In terms of the APS Act, for example, contravening Section 6 of the Act, if they were to issue a directive, you don't comply with a directive, but instead of seizing your product, they prosecute, which they're allowed to do. There's no interdict preventing them from prosecuting. First offense, fine or imprisonment up to 2 years, which is a 200,000 Rand fine equivalent. Second and subsequent 4 years, which will be a 400,000 Rand fine equivalent. Under the CPA, the fines are huge, but let's not worry too much about that. But those fines can go up to 10% of your turnover. So finally, the possible consequences for your products, just apart from getting the fines and presuming you're not protected by the interdict for now, is forfeiture of your product. But what you're not protected against is an order ordering you to relabel your product, or telling you you need to destroy the product yourself. You're not allowed to sell it. It's going to expire. You're going to have to destroy it. So they're not seizing it. They're preventing you from selling it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janusz. I think you've set the tone in terms of the legalities and the understanding of what's actually the interdict saying and what it's not saying, and who it's applicable and who not. So I think, Donovan, I'm going to hand over to you so that you also present your side, and then there's 1 or 2 questions that's coming in, and then after that we can go into the questions. So Donovan, over to you.
Thank you. I hope that no one is expecting the same level of legal knowledge that Janusz just presented. It's absolutely been amazing to see how complicated the space is. And I think one of the biggest issues that we've had as ProVeg is trying to get on top of all of the legal aspects of it. What I'm presenting today isn't going to be about the legal aspects. What I'd like to talk about is just what has been happening behind the scenes in the last 2 months, what the ban's impact has been so far, and whether or not people have started changing their names, what the preferred outcome from ProVeg's point of view and from the industry partners that we've been talking to looks like, and then just very generally the future of meat analogues. And this is just an introduction and presentation. I could speak for hours and hours about this, so please ask questions. I am going to also fly through this very, very quickly. So first of all, 2 months of chaos, what has been happening behind the scenes. And so I think the first thing that we need to be very clear about is that this is an issue that is new to most people in the plant-based space. So as Janusz showed, there's a lot of regulations and a lot of law that has to be complied with. Many of the players in this space aren't aware of many of them because there hasn't been that enforcement. So it's a very new thing for the players in this plant-based industry to be dealing with this, even though they're in a country where there's so many other issues that they're dealing with. Obviously, this cartoon is a bit of a joke, but the reality is that the companies that we're working with have a lot of other issues that they are trying to deal with just to bring their product to the market. So it has been very difficult, and there's been a lot of chaos that's been caused by this that we believe could have been prevented with more dialogue around what the department wanted us to do. It's also very important to take into consideration the fact that this is not something that is happening in South Africa in isolation. This is completely not surprising if we look at what's happening around the world. Why I think many people in South Africa were so surprised is that there hasn't been news around people reducing the amount of meat that they're eating. If we look in the countries where most of this kind of action has been taken, it's been in countries, Europe and America, where meat consumption is either slowing down or in some places even decreasing. So it seems like there's a fight between the meat industry and the plant-based industry, specifically because the meat industry is worried about people eating less meat. Where in South Africa, at least for now, as much as ProVeg would love to say that everyone is starting to reduce meat consumption, in South Africa, meat consumption is still increasing and at quite an unhealthy rate. So what did we do when this happened? ProVeg got together our partners and we wrote a joint letter. A very simple joint letter, just stating that the specific regulation that was mentioned doesn't apply to meat analogues, and that we would really emphasize the requirement or our request for further dialogue in the space. And I think the main point of this joint letter isn't necessarily, to try and say that we're right or to try and say that the government's wrong, but it's to say that a large group of stakeholders in the space really didn't know that this was the case, and none of these players thought that they were breaking the law, which was what we were told we were doing by the government. And then, as Janusz mentioned, there's now been this interdict, and the appeal will be followed. And I think a lot of people are sitting and waiting to see what happens. And I think for a lot of people, including myself, a lot of the information that Janusz just shared is very concerning still. It does take a lot of time and effort to try and get that legal understanding of what exactly can be done. And we are hoping that this interdict and the appeal process, although the government may still have the right to take the action that was laid out by Janusz, that they would see that we should probably or hopefully err on the side of trying to do what's best for everyone, and not necessarily just try to say what are we allowed to do. Let's go and do that. I'm going to move on, and there's obviously been 2 months. There's a lot more happening, but the reality is that most of the players in the space have either genuinely not known what to do, or a lot of the players who have bigger legal teams have been working in a silo. And it was really amazing to have the Consumer Goods Council take the lead on this. And we obviously encourage any of our members who haven't already joined the Consumer Goods Council to join, so at least they are protected against those seizures. So the impact so far, a lot of people didn't realize that the fact that the interdict was put in place, which meant that the seizures didn't happen on the 22nd, that didn't mean that there's been no impact so far. So I think the impact that made the news the most was when Spur spoke about the fact that they were no longer going to be able to stock Beyond Meat. And that obviously made the news. The world's largest or most well-known meat replacement company not sending product, or at least Infinite Food not being able to import those products. And it starts to show you that the impact is not necessarily something that we have to look on a local level at, what's the impact on a manufacturer in South Africa, what's an impact on a restaurant in South Africa. This is really something that's so much bigger than that. This is impacting the global view of South Africa as a place to do business. We would love, when my discussions with Infinite Foods and with Infinite Foods discussions with the amazing companies that they're bringing into South Africa, the idea of why don't we manufacture these products in South Africa is something that would really be beneficial to the plant-based industry here, but as a bigger picture, it would be very beneficial to South African economy in general. And if you're a company that's based overseas and you're looking at this, not just the actual regulations or the law, but how it's being dealt with, this is not something that's going to give you confidence to say, I would like to go and start a factory in South Africa. There's just the headlines from the news from Spur. And then I think the other really big thing from our members, our stakeholders, is that the uncertainty that this caused was possibly more dangerous than someone actually going and seizing product. Obviously, the immediate financial implications of product being seized would have been huge, but we've had a lot of our partners saying for the last 2 months they haven't been able to make a decision on what they're going to do. And a lot of people have also asked, why is this so confusing? Why don't we just change the name of the products? And for a lot of the brands that we work with, they are making products that are so specific that it's incredibly difficult for them to find another name. So they're not sure, they're genuinely not sure what to do and whether it's even worth making these products if they're not going to be able to call it something that will allow a consumer to identify it. So an example would be a plant-based salami type of product. So if we're allowed to call it salami style deli slice, then that's a product that can be made. But it's very difficult for a producer to try and make a product like salami, specifically for someone who's looking for a plant-based salami, if they can't call it that, because it's obviously a very niche product. And if you have to call it anything else, it's going to be very difficult. Without being able to use the word salami, it's going to be very difficult to differentiate that from any other deli slice or a vegan polony, which we obviously couldn't call polony. But you can see the difficulty in trying to invest resources and R&D into making a product that you might not be able to market in a way that the consumer who might be looking for a product would be able to find it. And then just very quickly, the legal costs have obviously also started to rack up. ProVeg was very lucky to have some pro bono legal support from attorneys at Lawton's. The Consumer Goods Council action is costing money, and we know that a lot of the organizations in this space have been seeking legal counsel, and that is costing money. And again, we're in a country where a lot of the companies that we're working with are not doing well financially and have many other challenges. Spending any money on legal fees on an issue that you really wouldn't have planned is obviously going to cause some problems. But the good news in terms of the impact that this is having is that it has raised the profile of the meat analog industry, in that we are able to be on the news a lot more talking about this action by Delrod, which, as Janusz said, is only a small part of the bigger picture. But what it's allowed us to do is to talk about, the benefits of these products. So for a lot of we haven't seen any evidence of this yet, but we believe that being able to be on TV and the radio talking about the benefits of these products are going to will hopefully actually be advantageous to the movement. So there's just some of a couple of the articles that we had. And then I think this is a really big question that we've been asked. A lot of our members and stakeholders are asking us if we think they should just change their names. And again, it's very easy if you are making a product like a vegetarian burger and you can change it to vegetarian patty. And we know that there have been some who are already doing that. We also know that, for example, Nando's, when they came out with their new Pretender range, they didn't call the pulled chicken style burger a pulled chicken style burger, vegetarian pulled chicken style burger, anything like that. They went very safe and they called it I think the wording that they used was plant-based protein, and they described it as a sandwich, even though it is, a meat replacement between two rolls, and most people, if they saw it, would call it a burger. We do know, and I have to speak off the record, or at least not say who we're talking about here. We do know that there are some big players who have already started changing their names, and we will probably see that in the trade in the next couple of months. I haven't seen any of the name changes actually coming through in any major retailers yet. Again, this slide just shows a very boring slide about a potential name. And the difficulty is that, again, we do want people to try and eat these products. And we don't believe that anyone is being misled by calling something a vegetarian chicken style burger. And I think Janusz's point is very, very important earlier, that we do need to have a look at the wording being used, because in some cases there may be an argument that it could be misleading. But from our point of view, having done a landscape analysis of the retail space, at least we don't believe that that is is happening. That's obviously where the department has focused its efforts. And then very interestingly, we've already seen around the world that there are some products coming out that completely try to avoid animal product names. So this is an example, one of the partners that we work with called Oomph, and their product is called Oomph. So instead of calling it chicken style pieces or beef style pieces or whatever, their product is just called Oomph, and this product called pulled Oomph would replicate something like pulled pork. And this example is fantastic to show that if you are a vegan or vegetarian and you're looking for these kind of products, you'll find them. Because when this product came to South Africa, I had no problem identifying what it was or finding it for myself. But if you are not a vegan and not a vegetarian, but you are looking to reduce your meat consumption and you are looking for these products, but you're not aware of what they are, it might be difficult when you see something called pulled oomph rather than something called vegetarian style or vegetarian pulled pork or pulled pork style strips or something like that. Then just very briefly, our preferred outcome. As ProVeg, another little cartoon, as ProVeg, we really would like to see the government working with us and working with the industry to answer some of these questions, rather than taking the relatively hard approach that they have taken to us. You know, we were not consulted as ProVeg, and we do represent a large portion of the consumer base with these products, and we represent a large portion of the manufacturers. And I think a lot of this could have been resolved if there was more consultation beforehand. I think the question about whether consumers are being confused is very important, and I think that what Janusz raised is also a very important part of that, is that we shouldn't be asking vegans and vegetarians if they're confused. We need to be asking the general public, and we would love to see research on that. Again, having worked in this industry for a while, including working for a large manufacturer who supplies all of the major retailers or most of the major retailers and fast food joints like Steers, we would have seen complaints if people were complaining that they had been misled. So we don't believe that that is the case at the moment. I think it could be the case going forward that more people will more market and are being misled as more of these products coming to the market. They are being merchandised in areas that aren't necessarily vegetarian or vegan. Where at the moment, when we look in the retail space, the vast majority of these products are being merchandised in the vegan vegetarian space, which makes it a little bit more difficult for them to be misunderstood. And this is probably the most important document that we have in terms of what our short-term outcomes, preferred outcomes are. And that's earlier this year, the department expressed that they were open to creating these new regulations specifically for meat analogues. And I think that was why we were so surprised when we got this communique threatening the seizures, is because we genuinely believed that that dialogue was being opened so that we could start working on new meat analog regulations. So we would love it if the department said, okay, let's put a hold on trying to seize people's products or trying to prosecute anyone for apparently misleading people, and let's start looking at these new regulations. And then the other really big thing for us is if we look around the world, what other governments are doing in this space, there's a lot of support for it. If you look at the benefits that come with eating more plant-based and also manufacturing these products, there are huge potential benefits.
Donovan, I'm not sure, but it seems like you...
For the government and obviously for the people of South Africa. So not only is it the health benefit potential, it's
Donovan, can you hear me?
Sorry, there are financial and yes.
Sorry, Donovan,
yes,
it seems like...
Have I broken up?
Yes, yeah, you broke up a little bit. If possible, can you just restart the explanation of the slide? there was a little bit of a delay and a breakup in your voice.
Okay, apologies. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, you know, we've been asking for support from government departments, from, you know, the health department, from the Department of Trade and Industry, obviously from DAF and Delrod, and it's very sad to see that the most interaction we've had with them in the last few years has been them threatening to seize products, where there's this huge opportunity for the government to support plant-based food and to, you know, really see the benefits both to the South African people, the health benefits, the environmental benefits, the ethical benefits, the food security benefits, but then also at the same time seeing the actual financial benefits or the financial potential that this has for South Africa as a country. You know, at the moment we have these crazy scenarios where product is being, or ingredients are being grown in Africa and then sent to Southeast Asia for processing, to be extruded into a high protein, concentrated protein product, and then that's been sent either to Europe or America to be turned into a meat analog product, and then that product is being sent to South Africa, and then it sits on the shelf at an expensive price, and everyone complains about that, or people who want these products complain about it. But the reality is that, you know, there is no support currently, and there's a huge amount of inequality on the landscape. And it's been very interesting talking to some of the people on the processed meat side who are saying that it's not fair that there aren't regulations that the meat analog companies are currently having to deal with, because as Janusz showed, there are a lot of regulations. A lot of them cost a lot of money to comply with, and the meat industry, to a large degree, because there have been scandals in the past, there have been issues like listeriosis outbreaks, there really has been a huge increase in the enforcement of this recently, and the meat industry is asking for a fair playing field. But when we look at issues around, you know, VAT and import duties and government subsidies and, you know, just general support from the government for the industry, there really is very, very little on the plant-based side, and specifically when we look at plant-based meat analogs, there's almost nothing. And yeah, it's very sad that the most interaction we've had with the government has been around them wanting to seize our products rather than help us to develop the industry. And then the future of meat analogs, there's this quote, I'm sure everyone's heard it: nothing's more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And I think that for a lot of people, that would be something that they talk about for the plant-based movement in general. But I think specifically with meat analogs, you know, for a lot of people, they're still going to want to eat meat. They're not going to worry about the environment or their health or animal ethics as much as they care about taste. But we're at the point now where the idea isn't just about not eating animals or about the environment. We've got to the point now where we have the technology that enables us to make these products that do taste and have the same taste experience as meat products. And I think the only thing that's really going to cause big problems for meat analogs is this next quote, where it says very similar: if nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come, there's nothing more ubiquitously pervasive than an idea whose time won't go. And I think for a lot of people in the plant-based space, when we talk to the meat industry, we're not trying to fight with them. We're just saying that there are these new products that have so many benefits, and, you know, at the moment it does seem like a big part of the strategy of the meat industry, rather than trying to improve their product offering, is to try and highlight problems with plant-based food. And I think that this labeling ban is at least part of that. I'm not saying that the labeling ban is entirely due to people trying to bring a war against plant-based, but it's definitely a part of that. And then just, yeah, the industries that are replaced are the industries that become either socially unacceptable, or where technology improves to the point where the old products are no longer necessary. And so we're at that point now where there's more and more and more of this idea that eating animals is unnecessary for our health, and that there are these social justice issues around climate change, around food insecurity, obviously around health. And a lot of these issues, there's the extra inequality issue around who is being fed these products and what is the education around the health issues. And there becomes a very big social issue where the poorest members of our community are being fed food that is incredibly unhealthy without them knowing that that is the case. And then just lastly, from ProVeg's point of view, we really want to highlight the fact that these products aren't going anywhere, and we will be hosting a braai on Braai Day for 1,000 people, hopefully, and we're going to be very proudly flipping a lot of burgers. Yeah, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Donovan. Really appreciate that. Janusz, you still online. Thank you. We've got a number of questions that has come in. Most of them is related to the legal components. So, Janusz, if it's okay with you, I'm going to fire away and ask you the questions that came in. So the first question that came in is, I agree there may be some ambiguity in the marketing of meat analogues using terms like chicken or beef. However, I'm being persuaded by the FSA for selling vegetarian sausage and vegetarian beetroot and butternut burgers. How can that be covered by the APS Act?
So I actually am of the belief that these generic names are actually fine. That's my personal belief. I don't think that there's a problem, because even if one looks at a dictionary, those are quite generic terms. One has to be careful, though, of the overall, how it's presented in its packaging, etc. The FSA did take a view at one stage that those names were completely prohibited, but they seemed to soften that stance even before there was an interdict. I actually believe that they will allow those generic names eventually.
Okay. And in that, then there's another question that's also related to labeling specific. Someone's asking, can we just put stickers over our stock?
Oh, yes, yeah, no, that is in fact what has happened in the past when there were problems with products. One of the solutions, even if they did a seizure, if one looks at what the Act says, if there's a seizure, several things can happen. One of them is, in fact, you correct the label by sticking a different label over it. So that is, in fact, permissible.
Okay, 100%. I hope that answers your questions, Natalie. Then this is an interesting question. So in terms of asking, and Donovan, I don't know if you also want to come in here. The question is basically, who is sitting behind this whole sudden mention of the situation that we've currently got? People are asking, or the person here said, is it the meat industry sitting behind it? I don't know, Janusz, Donovan, I don't know which one of the two of you want to answer.
I don't want to say, I actually don't know. You know, I saw the department came out with all the stuff. I don't know if there's someone behind it or who's behind it.
Donovan, from your side?
Yeah, so we know that SAMPA, the Processed Meat Association of South Africa, they were definitely asking for new regulations, and I've met with their chairperson Peter on a couple of occasions, and we actually surprisingly agree on a lot more than people would think we did. And I think what Janusz said earlier about, you know, the generic words like burger, I don't think that they were ever asking for those words to be banned. And so when we sat down and had a conversation shortly after the communique went out, the conversation went very well, and I think that it just shows, you know, if the people who we thought were behind this are able to have a very constructive conversation with us. Well, I mean, there are a few points where we disagree, but the points that we disagree are you know, around where we start talking about very specific wording, like chicken style versus chicken flavor, or you know, boerewors and biltong, which is regulated in a completely different way to, you know, burger. And so we don't think at the moment that in South Africa, in this specific case, that there's some big bully who's just trying to like come and destroy us. We do think internationally that there is some evidence that that is happening, and some of these burger ban regulations that have come out in Europe specifically was definitely a push from the meat industry. But in this specific case in South Africa, there is some confusion about why there was this really, really strong action by the government. And maybe there's someone sitting behind the scenes trying to pull strings that we don't know about. But as far as ProVeg knows, the big push for new regulations was from the Processed Meat Association, but that they weren't asking for something that was this big or this sudden or this dramatic.
So
I must add that it's not just we talking about analog meat, but many of the products that fall into this category, dairy products, are regulated as imitation dairy products. There was a directive issued to withdraw egg analogues. So it's across the board. It's this whole issue of vegan or vegetarian analogues of animal origin products. And they acted against all of them at the same time, if one was to speak, to put it in perspective.
Yeah, I just want to say, in terms of that, Janusz, is there any regulations currently in terms of managing food safety risks within the plant-based environment, like micro standards? Is there any regulation?
So there's no, what do they call them, VPNs or whatever those standards are under animal health and so on. But the normal food safety regulation, R638, FCD Act, the micro regulations, all of those apply. It doesn't matter what your source of your product is.
But what in terms of ingredients that we don't know of? I can't recall now, but that scenario of that funny product that were placed in, and they've now determined that it was this ingredient that caused the food poisoning.
Tara flour in the USA, yeah. Tara flour as opposed to Tara gum. So Tara gum is an accepted ingredient, and somebody had the bright idea, well, let's grind up the whole plant and put the flour into foodstuffs. So no, look, in terms of law, what you're allowed to sell as a foodstuff is regulated. So that's fine. I mean, but that would apply across the board. It doesn't matter if it's a vegetarian product or an animal-based product. You can't just decide to pick something in your garden and start adding it to a foodstuff. But yes, as long as it's a generally accepted food ingredient, you can use it, whether you're adding it to a meat product or you're making a vegetarian product out of it, doesn't matter.
Okay. I think this one you've answered, but just to answer it clearly again, do we have a chance of successfully arguing the use of generic words like burgers, sausage, and I assumed meatballs, the word balls?
So, sorry, Donovan, I keep answering all these questions, but let me just take this one as well. So, if not with FSA, then you should win on appeal. You know, FSA are not necessarily legal geniuses, so they may take a view and just stick to it. You know, the railway line scenario, they're on the track and they just keep going. But if you file an appeal, an independent appeal board gets appointed. I've served on appeal boards before, and they really are independent. They're not people with an agenda usually. And I think on appeal, they would find that those terms are fine.
Okay, and I think then similar to that one is which regulation is basically indicating these words or the definition of these words?
So the one that the interdict went about was R1283, and actually that regulation, in my view, didn't actually prohibit a lot of these terms. But R2410, which came out just over a week ago, so after the interdict was issued, the so-called raw processed meat regulations. Don't confuse that with processed meat regulations. There they have a whole string of definitions. Mince, boerewors, sausage, they've got all those definitions in there, but they're all preceded by the word raw.
Okay, okay, that's wonderful. We've got a few more questions, but our time's running out. So what we will do is we will definitely make sure, but before we go, Donovan, I'm sure of it, as ProVeg, just tell us a little bit more. I'm sure of it, this is not the only thing that you guys do in terms of for the
I think that's I mean, it's amazing at the moment. We've been in the press quite a lot around this issue, but it's really important for us, for people to know that you know, labeling of plant-based food is a really small part of what's happening in the movement in general, and that, you know, ProVeg works to try and get more consumers to know about these products, and to get the government and to get the industry to really embrace the benefits that these products have to offer. So we have public campaigns like the Braai Day, where we're going to hopefully have 1,000 people potentially set a world record for the most veggie burgers flipped at a barbecue. Just to show the public that, you know, you can actually eat these products and you're not going to really be missing out. And things like Veganuary and the Veggie Challenge, which are opportunities for people to sign up to get more information. But then on the government side, there's so many other areas that we're working on. You know, the Department of Health, for example, if you actually look at their health recommendations for how much meat we should be eating, it's drastically less than what our average meat consumption per person is. So our government really does, from a health point of view, advocate meat reduction, but nowhere are they actually publicly advocating for meat reduction. So talking to them about that. And then on the climate side, same thing. So we know that there are climate advantages of reducing at least some parts of animal agriculture, but at the moment in South Africa, we're not focusing on that at all. Our massive focus is on renewable energy, which is probably the hardest one from an economic point of view to pull off. You know, tomorrow, there's very little that an individual in South Africa can do to drastically reduce their reliance on petrol and coal. But, you know, so you're not going to be reducing your carbon footprint by cutting back on fossil fuels. And even as a country, you know, we've seen what's happening in Europe at the moment, where if everyone tries to go towards renewables, you're then beholden to the people who own all the gas and petrol, which is, I mean, it's part of this massive, a really global problem, where the countries that own the petrol or own the fossil fuels are now being able to like dictate terms, which is to some degree a result of so many companies or so many countries moving towards renewables. So why is South Africa focusing on that, where there is this big opportunity for us to really take the lead on something that is relatively new around the world?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's so many things that I always say that people can and they do complain about, but at the end of the day, we still have food, you know, and a lot of food. And I must say as well, you know, I live in the Netherlands, and here it's amazing to see the amounts of different products, you know, in this field that they've got. And yes, also sustainability is very important, because here, you know, there's real evidence of where things are going wrong because of, you know, sustainability not being kept up. But Janusz, is there any closing words from your side that you would like to leave the audience with?
Yes, look, I think we all like to complain when the government doesn't regulate. Oh, there's no law enforcement. But of course, when it's against you, then all of a sudden it's a big problem. I think one has to sit down and be very realistic about this. And honestly, I think if the names are used in a way that is not intended to confuse the public, it's going to turn out for those people well. And those companies that are trying to take advantage through intentionally misleading type of advertising and advertising marketing, regardless of what they believe is happening now, it's going to end badly.
Okay. Donovan, Janusz, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I know that you're both very busy. So as Food Focus, thank you very, very much. For everybody that's listening, yes, the recording will be available. And yes, both Janusz as well as Donovan's presentation will also be available as a download. It will most probably be available from Thursday on our website on the webinar page. So you're more than welcome to go and listen to the recording again, or even send a recording link to someone that you would feel would have value from this. And for the questions that we did not answer, we will definitely make sure that we get the answers, and we would also have that as a download with the recording. So thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And like I said, Janusz, Donovan, thank you. And yeah, may you all have a blessed, where are we today? Tuesday, and the rest of the week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye-bye, Donovan.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.